Chapter 15 of Blackbeard, Buccaneer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Beeswax Candle. Blackbeard, Buccaneer by Ralph D. Paine. Mr. Peter Forbes mourns his nephew. It seems a long time in the course of this story since the Honourable Secretary of the Council, Mr. Peter Arbuthnot Forbes, was forced to sail into Charlestown from the Plymouth Adventure on that most humiliating errand of finding medicines for Blackbeard's fever-smitten rogues. For the sake of his own dear nephew, and for the other hostages detained on board, he had endeavoured to perform his bargain and was returning across the bar when the threatening clouds and other portents of a violent storm caused the seamen to lose heart. They put about and drove back into the harbour for shelter in the very nick of time. These were pirates from Blackbeard's crew, it may be recalled, with his grizzled, scarred boatswain at the tiller. They had felt safe enough to swagger and ruffle it through the streets of Charlestown, and to terrify the people. Their worthless lives were protected by the hostages, who waited in fear and trembling. The town seethed with indignation, and was hot with shame. There would be no more of the friendly traffic with pirates. It was fully believed that the wretched Blackbeard would be as good as his word in allowing no more than 2 days' grace. Therefore, when Mr. Peter Forbes came back in the boat to inform his neighbours that he had been unable to reach the ship, it was sadly taken for granted that those helpless passengers had been put to death. Forthwith, the pirates of the boat's crew were seized and thrown in jail. There they lay in double irons till the council met and ordered them to be tried. In accordance with the verdict, the 6 seamen and the boatswain were promptly hanged by the neck from the same gallows at White Point, hard by the town. And the people no longer shivered at the name of Blackbeard, nor feared his vengeance. Their fighting blood was thoroughly aroused. Not long after this, there arrived from England a new governor of the province, a man of honour and resolution, who approved what had been done. This Governor Johnson proceeded to organise the town for defence, building batteries on Sullivan's Island, recruiting the seafaring men and the militia, and seeking to obtain merchant vessels which could be employed as armed cruisers. Learning that the governor of North Carolina was in a corrupt partnership with pirates, he sent messages to Virginia to solicit cooperation. This activity made much work for Secretary Peter Forbes, who forsook his intention of going to England to beg the cooperation of His Majesty's government against the plague of pirates. Dapper and plump and important as of yore, his florid face was clouded with sorrow, and he seemed a much older man. He mourned his nephew, Jack Cockerell, as no more, and felt as though he had lost an only son. Every angry word he had ever addressed the lad, every hasty punishment inflicted, hurt him grievously. It was solace to talk with winsome Dorothy Stewart, because hers was the bright optimism of youth, and she held so exalted an opinion of Jack's strength and courage that she refused to abandon hope. The fact that he had confided to her his rash intention of running away and signing as a pirate sooner than being transported to school in England persuaded her that he might be alive. "From what you saw yourself, Mr. Forbes," she said, "when Blackbeard boarded the Plymouth Adventure with his dreadful men, our Jack won his fancy." "So it appeared, Dorothy. The boy boasted of knocking a tall pirate on the head, and he read this monster of a pirate more shrewdly than I. Yes, Blackbeard took it with rough good humour, but Jack would ne'er consent to sail with him. It was that confounded steed Bonnet with his gallant air that turned the lad's head. He cast a glamour over this trade of murder and pillage." "Be that as it may," returned Dorothy with a sigh and a smile, "I confess to a romantic admiration for this bold Captain Bonnet. He wears an air of mystery which is most becoming. We must not blame poor Jack." No, I am done with all that," hastily exclaimed Uncle Peter. "All I dare hope is that when Blackbeard is captured we may learn what fate befell the boy. It makes the torture worse to have him vanish without trace." "And yet I have faith the sea will give him back to us, Mr. Forbes. He will find you a chastened guardian, not so apt to box his ears." Uncle Peter was so distressed by this gentle raillery that the girl begged pardon and vowed that she would never again offend. It so happened that they were sitting together in Parson Throckmorton's garden a day or so after this, when a friend came running in with tidings the most unexpected and incredible. A negro slave had come from a plantation a few miles inland, and he bore a letter written by none other than Captain Jonathan Welsby of the Plymouth Adventure. It narrated how he and the survivors of his ship had journeyed that far after weeks of suffering and frequent skirmishes with Indians. They were compelled to rest and take shelter before undertaking the last stage of the journey. Councillor Peter Forbes was magically changed. He shed his dignity and threw his hat in the air. Clasping Miss Dorothy's slender waist, he planted a kiss on her damask cheek. Parson Throckmorton was ramming snuff into his nostrils, his wig all awry, while he sneezed trumpet blasts of rejoicing. "Survivors! Oh, bless me, that lusty stripling will be amongst them. He can survive anything but Greek and Latin. I will spare the rod in future." "I told you so, Uncle Peter Forbes," laughed Dorothy. "Not so fast," quoth he in a mood suddenly sobered. "Captain Welsby includes no list of those in his party." "But of course, one of them is sure to be Master Jack," she insisted. "I am a selfish man and a laggard officer of the Crown," he exclaimed with an air of great self-reproach. "There are women in that company and wounded men, no doubt. We must take them clothing, horses, food, a surgeon." He bustled off to the governor's house to find that energetic gentleman absent at Sullivan's Island. Acting for him, the secretary of the council sent the town crier to summon all good citizens to the tavern green. In the space of an hour, the men and supplies were assembled, and with Mr. Forbes in command, the band of mercy made haste to reach the plantation. During the march there was a buzz of anxious surmise. Was this one or that alive or dead? Had the hostages been slain, and were these the sailormen of the Plymouth Adventure who had been set adrift by Blackbeard? Councillor Forbes winced at hearing such talk as this, but his heart beat high nevertheless. So confident was he that he was about to behold his manly nephew. It was loud cheering when they came to the cleared land of the indigo fields, and saw a tattered British ensign fluttering from the log stockade which enclosed the huts of the overseer and his labourers. In the gateway appeared the stalwart figure of Captain Welsby, in ragged garments and with a limping gait. Other men crowded behind him, and responded with huzzas which were like a feeble echo. The friends from Charlestown rushed forward to embrace them, loudly demanding to know where the rest were. "We fetched the women safe through," answered Captain Welsby, whose eyes were sunken, and brown beard streaked with grey. 12 good men of my crew are dead, and 3 of the gentlemen passengers. The swamps took toll of some, and the Indians slew the others. We were besieged a fortnight by the Yamassees. A hard experience, all of it, and wondrous luck to have escaped." Councillor Forbes delayed while his companions entered the huts to attend the invalids. He struggled to ask a question, but his voice was beyond control. "I understand," kindly spoke the shipmaster. "Your lad is not with us, nor can I say if he be dead or alive." "The Indians carried him off?" weakly inquired the uncle. "No, he was never seen after we abandoned ship. Your Jack, a chum of his from Blackbeard's crew, were for making the beach on a small raft of their own contrivance. This was after nightfall, Councillor, and what with the landed breeze and a crotchety set of tide among the shoals, they floated out to sea." "On a small raft," muttered Mr. Forbes, "in a vast ocean. I know of no ship voyaging to or from these ports which might have found them." "I was in hope of hearing news of the lads from you," sorrowfully said the shipmaster. "There is the chance, tiny though it be, that they were sighted by some vessel bound to foreign parts across the western ocean." The uncle shook his head in a manner profoundly dejected. There were duties which summoned him, and he choked down his own grief turning from the sympathetic mariner to minister to those in distress. Horse litters were soon ready for the exhausted but heroic women who had been kept alive by the devotion of the noble British seamen in accordance with the traditions of the merchant service. Those unable to walk farther were placed in carts. Clothed and fed, the sailors were in blithe spirits, and talked of going to sea again as soon as they could find a ship. In the crowd which met them on the outskirts of the Charlestown settlement was Dorothy Stewart. She scanned the straggling column, and then ran from one cart to another. It was impossible to convince her that Jack Cockerell was not there. But when she heard from Uncle Peter the news that Jack was missing but not surely dead, her faith burned anew, triumphant over fact and reason. "See how the great storm came to save him from Blackbeard," she cried, her hand nestling in Uncle Peter's arm. "And look how he came unscathed through that bloody battle with the pirates in the Plymouth Adventure. Why, a cruise on a raft is merely a frolic after all that." "I would not discourage your dear dreams, sweet maid," was the gentle response. "And may they be truer than my own forebodings." Charlestown was more than ever resentful when it learned from these poor people how the pirate sailing master, Ned Rackham, had plotted to get rid of them, and how mournful had been their sufferings after the shipwreck. The one boat left to them had been too rotten to send along the coast, and they had plunged into a wilderness almost impassable. Meanwhile, Governor Johnson, stirred by this episode, had received word that the province of Virginia was both ready and anxious to join in an expedition against Blackbeard. Governor Spotswood of Virginia would be outfitting such craft as he could get together on the James River, while he awaited a reinforcement from Charlestown. The best vessel available for immediate use was a small brigantine, the King George. There was no lack of eager seamen when Councillor Forbes and Colonel Stewart proclaimed the muster on the Tavern Green. Among those selected were several of Captain Jonathan Wellesby's sailors, who were primed to fight, even though there was not much flesh on their bones. He himself was a forlorn mariner who had lost his good ship and found no joy in life. With a grim smile of gratitude, he accepted the invitation to go as master of the King George, with Colonel Stewart as a sea soldier to drill the men and lead them in action. It was while they were slinging guns aboard the brigantine that some of the men happened to notice a small boat coming into the harbour under a rag of sail. At first it was taken for a fishing craft, and there was no comment until it was quite close. Then they saw that it was a ship's jolly boat, much the worse for wear, with only 2 occupants. These were half-naked lads, burned black to the waist, with a queer kind of canvas headgear as a protection against the sun. The boat was steered to pass under the stern of the King George, and the crew was unable to fathom if these were pirates or victims of another shipwreck. Captain Wellesby solved it by shouting, "Both your guesses are right. One is the pirate Junker that served our cause in the Plymouth Venture, and t'other is Master Jack Cockerell." One of the Charlestown volunteers heard only the word pirate, and growled with an oath, "One of Blackbeard's spawn? We'll make precious short work of him. Hand me a musket and I will save trouble for the hangman." "Here, stop that," said Captain Wellesby, beckoning his own men. "You old adventure hands know better. Quell these lubbers. If there's to be hostile feeling ashore, I shall take this lad aboard under my own protection." During this argument, the sea-worn pilgrims in the jolly boat had recognized the shipmaster and were joyfully yelling at him. In response to his gesture, they pulled down the sail and rowed to the gangway of the brigantine. There was no need to fear the wrath of the Charlestown seamen, because the adventure hands stood by as a guard while they explained how this young Joe Hawkridge had valiantly helped to turn the tide of battle against the prize crew of pirates, and there was such a rousing welcome for Master Cockerell that all else was forgotten. His old shipmates fairly mobbed him. "I'll fire a gun and hoist all the bunting to signal the town," cried the skipper, his face shining. "And presently I'll send you to the wharf in my own boat. But first tell me, boys, who took you off the little raft, and whence come you in this ship's boat?" "Blackbeard rescued us, and we borrowed the boat from him," demurely answered Jack, watching the effect of this bombshell of a sensation. "Blackbeard?" echoed the bedazed shipmaster, and the others chimed it like a chorus.
"Aye, old buckets of blood himself," grinned Joe Hawkridge. "We had him tame proper when we parted company. First we chased him through a swamp till his tongue hung out and left him mired to the whiskers. Then for another lark we scared him in his own ship, so he begged us on his knees to forbear. We learned Captain Ed'd teach his manners, eh, Jack?" This was too much for the audience, which stood agape. A dozen voices at once implored enlightenment. With a lordly air for a youth whose costume was mostly one leg of his breeches, Master Cockerell reproved them to wit. "Captain Stede Bonnet was more courteous to our distress when we sailed with him. He gave us a thumping big breakfast." "Right-ho!" declared Joe. "'Tis our custom to spin strange yarns for clothes and victuals in payment." The men scampered to the galley and pantry, but refused to let Captain Wellesby carry these rare entertainers into the cabin. Graciously they sketched the chief events, omitting all mention of the treasure chest, and Jack explained in conclusion. "And so I was stricken homesick, like an illness, and Job had his fill of pirates too. The wind was wrong to rejoin Captain Bonnet in the inlet harbour after we shipped his ghosts in the jolly boat, and we had a mariner's charter of the Carolina coast, and—"
"But what did you do for subsistence?" broke in Captain Wellesby.
"Food and water," answered Joe. "Oh, we landed with the thirst plagued us too bad, and there was rain to fill a bite of the sail and a pannikin to save it in."
"And we lived on oysters mostly," said Jack.
"And Joe killed a fat opossum with a club, and we caught some fish in a net which I knotted from a ball of marline that was in the boat, and we foraged for pawpaws and persimmons." "And whenever the breeze was fair, we put to sea again," said Joe. "And it was a long and weary voyage, though not so many leagues on the chart."
The captain's boat was ready, and they tumbled in, two wayfarers of the sea who were as lean and sun-dried as the buccaneers of old Trimble Roger's fond memories. Hardships had seasoned and weathered them like good ash-staves. On the wharf was Uncle Peter Forbes and Governor Johnson, and a concourse of townspeople drawn by the joyous signals flown from the brigantine. Jack looked in vain for Dorothy Stewart, and was thankful that her welcome was deferred. Shears and a razor and Christian raiment would make him look less like a savage from the coast of Barbary. Uncle Peter wasted a vast deal of pity, thinking the castaways too weak and wasted to walk. Jack strode along with him, the crowd at their heels, and soon had the plump counsellor puffing for breath. They insisted on taking Joe Hawkridge with them, although he was for seeking lodgings at the tavern. He was one of the household, declared Mr. Forbes, while Jack warned him to be aware of impertinence, lest he be sentenced to chop wood for the kitchen fire. The neighbours and friends, as curious as they were joyful, were barred from the house while the lads talked, and Uncle Peter carefully made notes of it all. It was too much for him to realize that Jack was sitting here lusty and laughing, and with the dutifully respectful manner as of yore, in spite of the man's part he had played to the hilt. Of all the exploits, that which most fascinated Mr. Peter Forbes was the chase after Blackbeard's sea chest, weighty with treasure, and the discovery of the knoll in the Cherokee swamp where he might have buried other booty. Here was a picaresque romance which allured the methodical barrister and counsellor, and he was as boyishly excited as his nephew. He examined the chart which Jack had copied from his rude sketch made on a piece of bark, and this raised a question which he was quick to ask. "What of Bill Saxby and this old bloodhound of a Trimble Rogers? As soon as Stede Bonnet could get the Revenge to sea, I've no doubt he sailed to Cape Fear River to get these pirate comrades of yours, and the seamen he left to find them. Once aboard, they would urge Bonnet to return to Cherokee Inlet, and let them go to hunt the treasure." "That may be, but we can trust them to deal fair by us," replied Jack. "Possibly," was the sceptical comment. Mr. Forbes was not too ready to believe in honest pirates.
"I'm not sure Captain Bonnet had a mind to bother with this treasure hunting," suggested Joe Hawkridge. "Leastwise, he may have put it off to an easier day. He has friends that keep him well informed, such as the governor of North Carolina at Bathtown, and all this flurry against pirating here and in Virginia 'd be apt to make Captain Bonnet wary of being trapped on the coast."
"Joe is full of wisdom as usual," said Master Cockerell.
"And if Blackbeard has cruised to the Spanish Main, as we suspect, the treasure may lie undisturbed for a while."
"Concerning Blackbeard, the evidence then in hand warranted your conclusions," was Uncle Peter's judicial comment. but I have received later information. The rumour is, and well founded, that he turned his ship and made for the Pamlico River, with the intention of obtaining pardon from the false and greedy Governor Eden. This would baffle our plans against him, or so he would assume, and it would enable him to remain within convenient distance of his treasure. "Would this province in Virginia respect such a pardon as that?" queried Jack. "Not in the case of Blackbeard," snapped the counsellor, "because we know it would be violated as soon as this treacherous villain could safely return to his piracies." "Then Joe and I will enlist in the King George brigantine," cried Jack. "Captain Welsby tells me she will sail for Virginia inside the week." Uncle Peter was about to make violent protest, but he checked himself, and his emotions were torn betwixt pride and yearning affection. He could not bear to let his nephew go so soon to new perils, but what right had he to try to shield him when public duty called? It was idle to pretend that Jack was too young and tender to embark on such service as this. He was fitter for it than some of the other volunteers. And so the unhappy Uncle Peter walked the floor with his cheeks puffed out and his hands clasped behind him, and said, with a tremulous sigh, "I swore to treat you no more as a child, Jack. 'Tis right and natural for you to desire to go in the King George as a fighting man tried and true. As for Joe Hawkridge, I have acquainted the governor with his merits, and his pardon is assured." "Thank ye, sir," returned the reformed young pirate. "A respectable life is what I crave, and the parson for company." "Sounds almost pleasant to me, including the parson," admitted Jack, "as soon as we shall have settled this matter with Blackbeard." End of chapter 15.